Hey everyone, this is Annalisa with Journey to the Goddess TV, regenerating ancient feminine wisdom for modern women. Today, I am so lucky to have two guests with me, Dr. Stephanie Zajchowski and Dr. Joanna Gardner, here to represent Fates and Graces and their annual Mythologium conference. And the theme for this year is Myth and Ecological Consciousness. Before we dive into this conversation, just remember to like this video, to leave a comment, and to please share it with other like-minded souls. So now I would like to introduce my guests. Today, I'm here with Stephanie Zajchowski, PhD. She is a mythologist, communication specialist, and writing coach based in Dallas, Texas. She is co-founder of the Fates and Graces Mythologium, a conference for mythologists, founder of Soul Story Coaching, and serves on the board of directors of the Pacifica Graduate Institute Alumni Association. She holds a doctorate in mythological studies with a focus in depth psychology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, and a certification in spiritual direction from Southern Methodist University. You can learn more about her work at stephaniezajchowski.com. I will leave a link in the YouTube text box to that. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. And next, at the bottom of my screen, I have Joanna Gardner. Joanna Gardner, PhD, is a writer, mythologist, and magical realist. She serves as managing editor of the Joseph Campbell Foundation's Educational Task Force, a thought leader with the think tank Irie Wilde, and a co-founder and leader of the Fates and Graces Mythologium, which is an annual conference for mythologists. For Joanna's publications and latest updates, you can visit her website at joannagardner.com. I will also leave that at the bottom of the YouTube text box. Welcome, Joanna.
Thank you so much.
I'm so happy to have both of you here. And even though we are filming in advance of Earth Day, this is going to premiere on Earth Day. And so I'm very excited to have you here with me to celebrate Earth Day and eco-consciousness, eco-awareness. Okay, so let's just jump right into the talk here. And I think, you know, we all graduated from Pacifica. We all have our degrees in mythological studies with an emphasis in depth psychology. So I think it goes without saying that for us, mythology is important and meaningful. But I sometimes wonder for the general public, and especially for those here that visit my channel, I would like to kind of give more of a groundwork, a framework for what we're talking about when we discuss mythology. So I'm hoping that both of you can individually give a definition of what a myth or mythology means to you.
So thanks so much, Annalisa. And what a great question to start with. What comes up for me when I think of the definition of myth, and, you know, we can talk all day long about the definition of myth if we wanted to. But what comes up for me, most importantly, you know, stories for sure. Myth has narrative as part of its DNA, but these are stories that are not everyday stories. These are stories that connect us somehow with something greater than ourselves. You could call it the sacred, you could call it the big wow, you could call it the source, you know, whatever name you want to give to it. And it, I say it, appears in myths, often in the forms of goddesses and gods, right? And so those figures in myth allow us to connect with that something that's larger than ourselves through our imaginations.
Oh, I love that answer. That's beautiful. Stephanie, do you have anything to add?
Absolutely. I love that answer. I think on an Earth Day theme, it's fun to say that my definition of myth keeps evolving and growing and moving. And I think that's just the very nature of myth, is that it's always kind of in movement. The minute you pin it down, it moves again. And that's the beauty of it. But similar to Joanna, you know, for me, myths are stories that offer meaning in its most simplistic form. You know, that's what they are. And they're everywhere. And what I find so fascinating about the study of myths and why it's so relevant is how myths evoke coherence, how they kind of gather people around them, around meaning and ideas. And so I think it's really important to study that, because these structures of meaning making that we develop and we kind of define our lives, we make decisions against those, you know, they kind of drive into our values and how we move in the world and what we do. And so the fact that it does drive us, inspire us, give us meaning and movement in our life, it's really important to be conscious of them and aware of them, and also beautiful and fun to study them.
Yes, exactly. And also what I wanted to bring up is that I think typically the way that, myth is used colloquially in the culture is that it's something that's false or fake. And I think that myths have their own, not only their own intrinsic value, but their own intrinsic realness, their own truth. And so I think it's important to at least hold that and honor that as for what it is as well, especially when we're looking at stories that belong to someone else's culture, for example. It's really important to honor myth as a truth. Why do you two feel that myths matter?
Kind of building on what Stephanie was saying, if we take it as true that myths are these sort of zones of coherence, of meaning making, then they are operating on us below necessarily what we think of as our conscious awareness day to day, right? And so they are present with us, cohering and forming meaning that informs the decisions that we make, whether we know it or not. So the more we become aware of that operation below the surface, the more we can bring that consciousness to it that Stephanie talks about and choose. Because I think it's important also to point out that myths aren't necessarily true, right? Mm-hmm. Like there can be truth in myth, and there can be things that don't apply anymore, or things that we might choose differently today than we chose 1,000 years ago when the myth was first coming into being, for example. Sure. And so holding that consciousness is so important, that awareness of deeper things operating on us, and the ability to see what they're doing in order to choose the next thing, because the myth doesn't stop, right? What we choose next influences what the myth becomes. And so it's this feedback loop that, the myth is operating, it works on us, we become aware of how it's working, we choose, and that influences the myth that goes back into a circle. I would offer that.
Yes. Beautiful. Stephanie, do you have anything to add?
I think that's beautiful and so ecological, Joanna, talking about kind of the feedback loop and the moving and how it all feeds off of each other. And feeding a little bit on that idea of myth as falsehood and myth as truth, we have these grand mythologies, but even if we look at, like, if you do a search, like often on LinkedIn, I'll see like the myth of the work-life balance, right? That'll pop up when you look at it and you're like, they're meaning it's a lie. You can't have a work-life balance. But if you dig a bit deeper into that idea, there's a lot of values that go along with that idea of work-life balance. Do I want balance in my life? What do I want work to look like? What is home for me? What is it? And so you're really digging into a lot of stories and narratives about what living a life means. What does it look like in my community, in my family, in my society? And so, yes, maybe that myth is saying this isn't possible, but there's a lot more going on in that story of, well, what's that about? And what is my meaning around a work-life balance? And what is my meaning? I mean, you can go deep enough to what is my meaning of living and all of that. So you can go really deep in what we look at as a surface level myth as a lie.
We can have like competing myths happening at the same time, or belief systems or ideologies. I think of myths as this frame through which an individual or a culture understands itself and the place in the world, and that ripples out to kind of all of these different ideological structures and social systems in a culture. I think that we also have to be aware that there are competing myths happening all of the time. I think that's where a lot of confusion and conflict can also arise when people are so in their myth and it's hard to see that they're talking to another myth.
I think that's it, Annalisa. It's conversation. The myths can converse with each other. They can conflict with each other. They interact like beings do, like humans. I love Stephanie's point about how it's almost like the word myth is like a signal. It's like a little flag that there's something big going on here, even when it's used to mean falsehood. I love that idea.
What do you feel the cultural role is for the mythologists today?
I think everybody chews on this a little bit when you're first kind of coming out, and what does this look like? And as I've read other mythologists and stuff, I think we're really able to see the patterns at play in contemporary society. And often that is delving into the question of why, why is this happening right now? Why is this behavior coming from this group? Why is this strange image appearing here? What is this about? And so we can kind of delve into that question of why. So I think responsibilities as a mythologist I see is like really helping build consciousness around patterning and a deeper understanding of patterning.
What's coming up for me is it almost has echoes of a little bit of the service that shamans can perform. And I want to walk very carefully in this territory because of the point Annalisa raised about cultural appropriation. We are not shamans. It's a fact. We are not, but there is sort of a rhyme with some of the function of the shaman who could see and share things that maybe the rest of the tribe wasn't seeing and sharing. The rest of the tribe was focusing on other things, and then these stories come up and the shaman shares the stories, and that allows some of that coherence that Stephanie was talking about, that in the sharing. I think the sharing is kind of the key verb.
I just wonder too about the place for meaning making in that story sharing. And for example, thinking back to my own work with the myth of menstrual danger, okay, it's great, like sharing this information with people, but to convey how deep this meaning making goes, how important it is. Well, I think it's important to question it. So how to convey that we see these patterns and why it's meaningful and important to see these patterns and either question them or just at least notice them. Like, how do you even convey the importance of meaning making to the public?
Well, I think you're doing it. And you're doing it with the deeply personal nature of your work. I think it's easy. It's an easy crutch for mythologists to say, we need to do this and we don't do that. And we. I think the real power is when we say, I am seeing this need. I am experiencing this gap. I am feeling this result of this cultural reality. And I'm now sharing that with you. And I think that's where our real authenticity is. And I use that word on purpose, author, authenticity, the self. I think that's the source from which comes what we can share. And I think, like I say, I think you're doing it.
Thank you. That's beautiful. Yeah. I always like a little shy away from the I because I feel like we're so hyper individualized in this culture. But I think that's a perfect example of where the I is actually really, really important.
I keep also coming back to consciousness, and I'm comparing it, depth psychologically. When something is driving me unconsciously, I'm not aware of it. And it's one thing, where I come to the self-realization of like, oh, that's what that is. And I have to have that reflected to me. I have to have that mirrored to me and presented to me externally before I can recognize it internally. And I think, like Joanna is saying, like the sharing and the I and the work that you're doing is really holding up a mirror saying, this is here. And someone observing it can be like, whoa, that shifts me because all of a sudden my consciousness is aware of it. It may not fix it in the moment. Yeah. And I shy from that term of fixing. I think we are gazing and we're directing others' gazes into areas that maybe haven't had that gaze as of yet, or a little bit less of that gaze thus far.
Oh, I love that. It's like a positive kind of affirmation, like the mythological gaze, as opposed to like some of these other gazes that are not so, positive in the culture, the male gaze, the white gaze. I love the mythological gaze. Let's get into the reason for being here today, which is to discuss what Fates and Graces is, what the Mythologium is. And let's start with that, and then we'll get into some of the other questions.
Yeah, so let's start with the Mythologium. So the Mythologium is, like you said in our intros, it's an annual conference for mythologists, right? We started this conference with a goal of creating a place where mythologists could gather and share their work, kind of like a professional conference, right? Like there are panels of speakers, each of whom presents a 20-minute talk, and then a discussion period at the end of those 3 panels so that mythologists can share their ideas, be in conversation. Again, we're going back to that mythological conversation, and strengthen their ideas, right? When you present your work in public, you strengthen it before you present it. And then when that work comes into conversation with other people, it strengthens even further. And we've seen it happen over and over and over. We started the Mythologium with the belief that it could happen. And now I know. because I've seen it. There have been 3 Mythologiums so far. The 4th one is this summer. And every year we see the strength of the work that the community brings, and we see it get even stronger together in that container of the Mythologium. And I'll pause there and hand it over to Stephanie. I'm sure there's more to add.
No, that's beautiful. And I always love your passion when you talk about it, because you can feel it coming across the screen, even on Zoom. We inspire one another. Like, I am inspired by Joanna just sharing that right now. I'm inspired by this conversation we're having right now. And so it's just, to me, really important to have a space where we all come together and inspire one another in that way, and amplify each other's work, but also amplify the work of mythological studies, which is a very unique area of work. And so, what we experience each year, I think, is when people come in and they're like, oh, wow, these people have a definition for myth, right? And and so we're starting in this area of rich material that can be expanded and discussed and built upon. That's the magic of the Mythologium for me.
And could I add one more thing? I mean, we could talk about the Mythologium all day, for real. And we often do. But another thing that kind of makes the Mythologium unusual, I won't say unique, because I'm sure there's others out there. One thing that kind of sets us apart is that it's not only panels. Like, it's not just panel. We also build in time for reflection and poetry and writing exercises, so that the community can kind of process what we're hearing in real time, because it's a lot. It's a lot of, like Stephanie says, really deep and meaty ideas that are lifted up in the space. And so building in that space to receive what we're hearing and to process it, to kind of metaphorically digest it, write about it, find our own way into experiencing it, I think it makes a big difference, at least for me, in my experience of the event.
Why did you start it? I think you have some more to share in that direction. And also, what's your greatest vision for the Mythologium?
I think we started it to some degree because we wanted the space for it. We craved the conversations and this kind of delving into the work, even beyond graduate school. So we created the space we wanted to be in.
And, the idea arrived with kind of an aha moment, like kind of that energy of like, this is the thing, we can do this, we must do this, and very similar to ideas that arrive for me in the writing process. It's an idea, it's a new thing, which fits the definition of creativity, right? If it's new and it's useful, it's creative. So to whatever extent the Mythologium is useful, it is a creative project. And the idea arrived not at an opportune time, as ideas often don't. And, we hadn't finished our dissertations. It made no sense. I had a full-time job. Stephanie had a family, and it made zero sense to try to fit in starting a conference in the middle of all that. But I was like, we have to do it. We have to do it. And partly, I think, because, we were coming to the end of our studies, and I was thinking, I can't stop doing this just because school's stopping. I can't stop gathering with these ideas and these people that I love. And I think that was part of the energy behind it. I, probably need years of therapy to sort out all of the energy behind it. But yeah, that's sort of a little bit of the background. So Steph, go ahead, chime in and correct what I've gotten wrong.
No, I love that story. Joanna's like, we can do this. Like, how? So it's a passion, certainly. A driving passion. And that's a very hard question of what we hope moving forward. I mean, I think we have all kinds of hopes moving forward, but to some degree, we're seeing it where it becomes like the Mythologium is. It just is the Mythologium. Like, it is its own entity.
And it's like Steph says, it's complicated, right? One of our hopes, I think, is to kind of keep carrying the flag that we started with, which is we share ideas, we inspire each other, we amplify each other's work, and in that way serve the community, right? And in terms of what it becomes, like Steph says, it just is. And it's almost, an ecological question, and Lisa, that like what it grows into, it's kind of a little bit not up to us. It's like, what does the community need? We'll see. It kind of has a soul of its own. And so our job becomes honoring that and not letting it devour us, which, it could. I want to honor what it wants going forward. And, we're not perfect. We do our best, and we do our best with the time and the resources that we have. And I think the Mythologium appreciates what we put into it. And I don't think it's going to ask too much of us.
I love kind of how that's almost a natural natural segue into this year's topic with myth and ecological consciousness. Let's segue into that then. What is ecological consciousness, if you had to offer a definition?
So to me, ecological consciousness is primarily the very first thing that comes to mind is complex consciousness versus linear consciousness, of moving out of that, the binaries of either or, the this, then this, then this must be that, and kind of moving into the complex space in which evolution happens, in which creativity happens, in which 2 + 2 might just equal 5 in weird ways that we don't even know about, right? That like kind of opening up outside of just pure logic into the fullness of the mystery, in addition to logic, right? Not abandoning logic, but allowing the greater whole to kind of hold the logic.
I think that is beautiful. And it's one of those things, to me, ecological consciousness is so amorphous and sometimes defies words, that I often adhere imagery to it to kind of help me conceptualize what I think of when I think of ecological consciousness. And what came to me is a lot of what Joanna was talking about is what I see as an interconnectivity amidst all things that's very relational, and yet you still have some individuality in there. And so the image that comes to mind when I try to describe it is a tree, because I love trees, and we have these giant oaks, out here that have these giant root structures that reach far and wide, and then these big branches that reach out and open. And so the roots are tapped into all kinds of things in the earth itself and moving around, but also other trees and other beings. And it allows the individual growth for the tree to open up and be this beautiful being that we sit under and read books, So to me, that interconnectivity is a very big part of ecological consciousness. And the idea that everyone has place, and that place is in relationship. So, if I expand, someone else contracts, something else must contract. If I consume nutrients, someone else gives nutrients. And then that also is my exchange back. I reciprocate that exchange. And so in ecological consciousness itself, that interconnectivity for me, it presents limitation, but also the ever-present co-creation, like Joanna was saying, or 2 + 2 could be 5, because you've got this interconnectivity that can co-create things we've never even conceptualized yet. So I think that metaphor itself is very earthly, but that metaphor applies in so many different ways throughout. And that's kind of my image for ecological consciousness.
Something that I've read over and over again in some ecological works about the intrinsic value of all life. And I think mythological studies also kind of offers that, this intrinsic value of our stories, of, all these images of self and other. We go back to that kind of I and thou relationship. How does eco-consciousness inform myth, and how does myth inform eco-consciousness?
I wish I could give you a mind meld into the submissions that we've gotten for this year's Mythologium, because there are so many answers to that question. When we came up with this year's theme, we didn't come up with this year's theme. It kind of grew very organically, I'll say, out of last year's conference, when we had a panel on myth and eco-consciousness. And there was so much energy and excitement around that panel that we were like, okay, we'll just, talk about that. And at the time I was like, I hope the community can, work with this. I think, I think it'll be okay, but we'll see. And wow, I mean, the proposals that have come in are just so exciting. So I'll stop talking about not answering your question. And one thing like a direct answer to the question that comes up for me, it really, I think, might connect to goddess studies, which is going back to what I was saying at the beginning about myth connecting us to something greater than ourselves. The planet is something greater than ourselves, right? Mother Earth, Goddess Earth. And that whole ecological existence, that being, that system, that complexity that holds us all in a very earthly sense, right? We're not talking cosmic at this point, except in as much as Mother Earth is a resident of the cosmos, but just that sense of that being and the stories that many people have told about the being who is the planet. And that's a whole avenue into myth and eco-consciousness.
I just have to say that would make a fabulous title or hashtag. Mother Earth is a resident of the cosmos. president of the cosmos.
She is, right? I mean,
Yeah.
like we all are.
Yeah.
A little bit. I think ecological consciousness, it's amorphous. It's one of those things that like, it's very hard to put words to it. So in the nature of how we react as human beings, we tell stories to kind of capture the things that can't fully be captured, but we want to capture them, right? So we get these myths or poetry or things that can kind of begin to hold the ineffable in them. And so reading through all of these things, like this is how we've talked about the things that we've experienced in ecological consciousness, even in its unableness to be captured, you know, which is fascinating. And then also to what I think you were mentioning earlier, Joanna, with the feedback loop, we write these myths about things that we can't fully explain to try to conceptualize them and hold them. And then at some point they become the rule book for how we interact with these things, right? And so this is how it says we're supposed to interact with the world. And so when you ask like, what's the importance of myth and how they influence each other, ecological consciousness and myth and ecological consciousness, I think that feedback loop is kind of continually important to study because it's telling us how to be in the world, right? And if we're looking at it a rule book, you know, that's one way, but we also can offer different perspectives and shifts and other things and understandings of how these stories could inform ways of beingness in the world for all beings.
Yes, that's right. Especially moving forward, because it's really easy also, at least for me, to look backward and be like, things were so great thousands of years ago when we were living, you know, in these small communities, et cetera, et cetera. But it's kind of irrelevant in a sense. It's good to understand, but it's like, how do we co-create this massive ecological awareness now and moving forward? What are we visioning for the future? One of the sponsors for this year's panel is Irie Wilde, and I know you work with them, Joanna. So could you talk more about what Irie Wilde is? Also, I have to say, I'm really curious about this terminology, rewilding, which I see everywhere now. So I'd love to hear what that means to you as well.
Yeah, sure. I can speak to the work that I do with Irie Wilde, but it's a broader organization than just the initiative that I'm on. I'm on the Healing Stories Initiative. So Irie Wilde is a think tank, and it was founded by Ida Kobe, who's fabulous. And hi, Ida, if you're watching. She has this vision. It's very much in line with what we're talking about, kind of bring this more wild way of thinking into the world, more story-based, more nature-based, I'll say, really more eco-conscious. And it was her panel, her organization's panel last year that was on myth and eco-consciousness, that there was so much energy and enthusiasm around. And the Irie Wilde panel this year is Myth in the Spirit of Empathy. And I forget, I think there was a little bit more description than that, but really, I think the goal of that topic is to open up our imaginations into imagining into the experience of the beings all around us in the ecosystem of planet Earth. And so this rewilding is really kind of so rewild, right? Wild again. So there's this implicit assumption that there was wildness once, and we might want to get back to it in some way on some level. And so what I do with the organization is I'm part of this group that meets once a month. We get together and we have a topic to discuss, and we dig in and we talk about it from the perspective of wilding and myth and story and, you know, culture. We lift up ideas and we test ideas, and we might challenge ideas and talk about, you know, the challenge to the idea and other possibilities. And yeah, I just encourage you to take a look at the website. It's iriewilde.com, and you can see the people who are working on the different initiatives and the different offerings that the organization has. It's a lot of fun, I will say. And, you know, I feel like that's part of it. If we're not having fun, what are we doing? And I think that's important to the work of eco-consciousness. You know, you look at the play in nature, look at dolphins playing, like fun is so important to things outside of video games. You know, it's an important strand of eco-consciousness, and Irie Wilde does a good job of bringing that element in.
Oh, I love that. I think a lot about all of the happenings inside of the human body, like the individual ecosystem that's in here that is so complex. I would probably classify as wild too. There's so much wildness inherent, obviously, to our being. So excited to learn more about Irie Wilde. Can we speak more to how goddess studies, divine feminine consciousness, matriarchal values, whatever the lens you want to look through, how that relates to eco-consciousness?
I think it's very interesting because when Joanna says Mother Earth, I have a particular image that comes to mind, and it's the one where it's a woman who's pregnant and the earth is her belly. And she's green. She's covered in lichen or something like that. It's very interesting how that image, if you were to say it into a room, a giant coliseum, everyone would probably have a grasp of what you were referring to, but they would all have different ideas around that image, right? Different ideas of what that means, different associations with what that means for them in relationship with stuff. So I think when we look at that image of like, in the sense of goddess mythologies and things like that, I think we often lose some specificity around some of those mythologies that image is based in. So it brings me back to the mythologist's task of building consciousness. And so it's kind of pointing to those specificities that are kind of often hidden or not associated, or what's really going on with that image and kind of the complexity of that. I think that work is really important. There's already been a lot of work in that area, where there's kind of highlighting the connection between the female body or the female procreative body, particularly in nature, and the positiveness with that and the negativeness with that, and just the ramifications of that. There's been a lot of scholars who've done work about, the abundance of the earth, and then, the destruction of the earth, and how those are often bifurcated into negative and positive, because, we want to focus on the good and push away the things we don't want to see, and how splitting apart complex mythologies like that has certain ramifications. So mythologists are already doing work in that, but going back to that conscious gaze, I think that's really important for us to keep that conscious gaze, the mythologist's conscious gaze on those goddess mythologies and things like that keep pointing to things that are hidden or forgotten.
Yeah, definitely. Joanna, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot coming up for me. I think of individual goddesses like Artemis as representations of ecological ways of being, eco-consciousness. Think of pantheons as inherently more eco-conscious rather than perhaps monotheistic approaches. What's coming up for me is also the realm of myth is pretty darn anthropocentric. And Mother Earth is not. We're entering the Anthropocene era, but if you were to ask a dolphin for an image of the Earth, they would have a pretty different image than we would come up with. If you were to ask an ant, what's Mother Earth, they would have a pretty different image. And so I think it's important to remember that in the way of eco-consciousness, we are one way of imagining among so many. And even among people, each of us has our own way of imagining. And the people way of imagining is so different than other species. And again, it goes back to connecting us to that something greater. The being that is Earth can hold all of these ways of imagining and is in some sense more than the sum of all of these ways of imagining.
I'll just add a little bit too, from my point of view. I'm rereading Sally Kempton's Awakening Shakti. And then in the beginning where she's telling the stories and, talking about Shaiva Tantrism and that worldview, it doesn't matter how many times I read about the meaning of Shakti or the elaborateness within that worldview, the very nature of the life force itself as feminine energy, as Shakti, as power, always in balance with Shiva, the masculine, awareness and consciousness. Creation requires both of them. It's an empowering feeling for me to think of power and life force energy as a feminine force, but also always in balance, the balance between masculine and feminine and the co-creation between them two in this worldview. And the co-creation of the cosmos and everything in it, every single molecule. I think as an ecological model, that really works for me. So that would be the piece that I would like to add to the conversation.
I love that you brought in the non-dual Shaiva Tantra. That puts me in mind of that Shaivite principle of the unity of the knower knows the known, the dancer dances the dance. And I feel like that gestures in the direction of ecological consciousness too. Life lives the life. The noun, the subject, and the object are all in a sense the same in that view. And it takes the ego out of, of the equation, and it allows that life force, that Shakti, to bloom, to dance, to flower, to play. So thank you for bringing that in.
Yeah. And thank you for adding that piece as well. So if there's anything that I've missed or that you feel is really important to add to the conversation, please feel free to share that.
I have a question for you, Annalisa.
Yeah.
So when you were talking about wilding, I felt like you have lots more to say on that topic. Like, is there anything else about, the wild, the inner wild, the outer wild? I don't know, but it just felt to me like there was something more.
Well, I've kind of been fascinated for the last few years in this dance between chaos and order that we see in the cosmologies, that we see in nature. I've been trying to educate myself in chaos theory to the degree to which I can understand it. You can see this constant, in my view, this over correction, this over trying to control the chaotic nature of the life force, or that we see within ourselves or in, nature. So I have just kind of this complicated feeling about rewilding, in that I understand that it's completely necessary. I think it's a beautiful concept. And there's just a part of me that feels really frustrated that we've even gotten to this place. The need for rewilding in and of itself as a product of our cultural evolution through the overcorrection, or through the over ordering of the wildness of chaos. So that's
maybe
kind
it's like over domestication, right? Over taming.
Right. And I did so much research into ancient Mesopotamia, and it's so much in their propaganda from the beginning of Western civilization. We can see how far back it goes, and beyond that, I don't know, because we don't have written records. So there's kind of a sadness in my heart that we've come to this point, but also I guess there is a joy in this work to rewild.
I think of the, the Cretan seals of the ecstatic dances.
Yes.
That seems to me an example of wilding within culture, a culture that isn't necessarily over domesticated, guessing from the image. Like you say, we don't have written records.
Right, exactly. I think, that's a great counter image. Thank you. I think I need to meditate on that for a little while, because there are other examples of that balance. And maybe that's one of the takeaways here, is eco-consciousness is about balance in its own way.
And a balance that's never fully achieved. Like, the goal isn't to achieve balance. The goal is to always be in the act of balancing, as I like teeter-totter. But I guess decisions have to be made, things have to be done, space has to be taken and given, but always with the effort of balancing.
I love that. And that's another thing from chaos theory. Most flight patterns or trajectories, like, they're only on course like 13% of the time or something. Right. But it's a chaotic model because, again, this is from my understanding of how chaos theory works. Order naturally arises out of chaos and dissolves back into chaos.
Every time the order arises, it's like, oh, it happened, it never gets old. It never gets old. It's the ongoing, wow.
That's beautiful. This has been really, really a pleasure. Thank you. Anything else that you'd like to contribute?
If we could invite people to visit myth2022.com to sign up for the email list for the Mythologium if they'd like to be in the loop. Registration will be open for the 2022 Mythologium. We can't wait to talk about myth and eco-consciousness with the community.
And I'll leave the link to that also in the text box. So everything will be super streamlined and easy to find.
Awesome.
Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciate both of you being here and having this conversation with me. It was really rich. It's just a taste of what's to come in July for the conference.
Definitely.
That's right.
And thank you. Thank you for having us.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Annalisa.
Yeah.
Yes, my pleasure. And any way that I can support women in their mission and their visions and creating a better world for all of us, I'm going to do that. To everybody at home, thank you so much for being here. If you like what you saw, please hit like, please leave a comment, please share this video. Don't forget to go find out more about Fates and Graces Mythologium, and share this video with your friends. The more we can get, this kind of conversation out into the world, I think the better off the world will be. Thank you again, and we'll see you next time, everyone. Ciao.